What if the most enduring symbol of revolution was not a crown, a scepter, or a neatly penned declaration, but a simple, scorched piece of leather? What if the most potent challenge to absolute power came not from a prince in a fortified castle, but from a blacksmith, his hands calloused, his heart broken, his rage forged in the fires of personal tragedy? If you're as fascinated by forgotten heroes and hidden history as we are, like this video and subscribe to join us on this journey. We are archaeologists of memory, sifting through the layers of hostile propaganda and the dust of ages to uncover the story of a phantom empire, a forgotten hero, a misunderstood struggle that echoes in the marrow of history. This is not just a tale of swords and sorcery, of kings and demons. It is an investigation into the very nature of tyranny and the anatomy of the courage that rises to meet it. It is the story of a man who held no title, commanded no army, and possessed no wealth, yet became the catalyst for an epoch-shattering uprising. Before you stands a chasm of forgotten history, a narrative deliberately obscured. Now let us begin, for the forge is hot, the hammer is raised, and the legend is about to be struck from the anvil of history. In the shadowed annals of the Shahnameh, the great Persian epic, there exists a time before time, an age shrouded in the mists of mythology, yet shockingly familiar in its political allegories. Before the blacksmith's hammer ever struck the spark of rebellion, a profound darkness had already begun to congeal, poisoning the very heart of the world. This was not a darkness born of simple malice or greed, but a far more insidious entity. A creeping corruption that first took root in the soul of a king once lauded as the paragon of civilization. His name was Jamshid, and his reign had ushered in a golden age of prosperity and innovation. Under his guidance, humanity learned the arts of weaving, medicine, and construction. He was a visionary founder who seemed to possess the divine grace, the far, that marked true kingship. For 700 years, his rule was a symphony of progress and peace. Yet, the summit of power is a treacherous place, and the air there is thin, often intoxicating the mind. Jamshid, surveying all that he had built, began to see not the blessings of a higher power, but the singular triumph of his own will. He declared himself a god, demanding the worship of his people, and in that moment of supreme arrogance, the divine Fa abandoned him, leaving behind a hollow man seated on a magnificent throne. The kingdom, once vibrant, began to wither, its spiritual foundation fractured. The soul of the nation was ailing, creating a vacuum into which a new, more terrible power could flow. It is a timeless lesson. Tyranny often finds its easiest purchase, not in a land of fools, but in a land that has lost its faith, a land where the people, disillusioned with a flawed hero, are willing to embrace a charismatic monster. The stage was now set for the entrance of a figure who would become the living embodiment of oppression, a name that would be whispered in fear for 1,000 years, Zahak. The fall of the visionary founder was complete, a prelude to a storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that would wash away the remnants of the Golden Age and submerge the world in an unprecedented era of despair, creating the very conditions that would necessitate the rise of an archetypal hero from the most unexpected of quarters. The story of Kaveh does not begin in his forge, but in the decadent court of a fallen king, a grim foreshadowing of the horrors to come. The genesis of the tyrant Zahak is a study in the insidious nature of evil, a creeping poison that enters not through a frontal assault, but through whispers in the ear and temptations of the flesh. He was the son of Mirdas, a noble and pious Arab king, but the young Zahak was possessed of a restless ambition that chafed under his father's gentle rule. This flaw, this crack in his soul, did not go unnoticed. For where there is a vulnerability in the human heart, a dark intelligence is always waiting to exploit it. This intelligence came to him in the guise of a friend, a counselor, a servant eager to please. It was Iblis, the adversary, Ahriman, the very embodiment of evil in the Zoroastrian cosmology, who saw in Zahak the perfect vessel for his world-spanning malice. Iblis first appealed to Zahak's ambition, weaving words that framed his father's piety as weakness and his own desire for power as a birthright unjustly denied. He convinced Zahak that to achieve greatness, the old order must be swept away, beginning with the patriarch himself. Deceived and emboldened, Zahak agreed to a plan of patricide. Iblis, the architect of ruin, dug a deep pit in a garden path where the devout murderers walked each morning to pray, and the king, in an act of faith, fell to his death in an act of betrayal. With his father eliminated, Zahak seized the throne, his first step on a path paved with damnation. Now, with the young king's conscience seared and his soul mortgaged, Iblis returned, this time in a different guise, that of a master cook. He presented Zahak with sumptuous feasts of slaughtered animals, introducing flesh into a diet that had once been pure, awakening a lust for blood and a gluttony that mirrored the king's insatiable ambition. For days, Zahak was enthralled by these new, decadent flavors. On the fourth day, thoroughly pleased, he offered the cook any reward he desired. Iblis, feigning humility, asked for nothing more than the honor of kissing the king's shoulders. The seemingly innocent request was granted. As the dark lips of the adversary touched Zahak's flesh, Iblis vanished, and in the place of his kiss, two monstrous black snakes erupted from the king's shoulders, living, writhing extensions of his own corrupted soul. The pact was sealed not in blood, but in a profane baptism, a monstrous coronation that marked the birth of a true tyrant. The horror of Zahak's new form was immediate and absolute. The twin serpents that grew from his shoulders were not mere deformities. They were sentient, malevolent entities with an insatiable hunger. In a panic, the newly crowned tyrant summoned every physician and healer in his realm, but their efforts were futile. No blade could excise the creatures, for as soon as one was severed, another would instantly grow in its place, a hydra born of a demonic pact. The snakes were a part of him, a physical manifestation of the evil to which he had surrendered his will. As Zahak languished in terror and pain, the architect of his misery reappeared, this time disguised as a learned physician, an archetypal corrupter, offering a twisted solution. Ahriman, the great deceiver, advised the king that the only way to soothe the serpents and prevent them from consuming him was to feed them. Their required sustenance was as specific as it was monstrous, a daily stew made from the brains of two human youths. This was the masterstroke of Ahriman's plan. It was not merely to create a monster, but to turn that monster into a perpetual engine of sorrow and destruction. A king whose very survival depended on the systematic slaughter of his own people. The reign of terror had found its rhythm, a daily drumbeat of death. Each day, the king's guards would scour the towns and villages, seizing two young men to be sacrificed. Their lives were extinguished to feed the slithering abominations that were now inseparable from the throne. This grotesque ritual solidified Zahak's power, transforming his court into a place of profound and abject fear. Cruelty and lies became the pillars of his administration. He was no longer just a usurper. He was a plague, a blight upon the land who devoured the nation's future to sustain his own monstrous present. The kingdom of Iran, already spiritually weakened by Jamshid's fall, was now brought to its knees, subjected to a demonic king whose very existence was an unending act of vampiric predation. This systematic sacrifice of the young became the defining feature of his thousand-year reign, a chilling allegory for how tyranny consumes the very lifeblood and potential of a nation. The world had seen evil kings before, but this was something new, a reign founded on a metaphysical horror, a government whose primary function was the harvesting of its own citizens. The decay of a nation under a corrupt ruler is a gradual, creeping rot that first infects the powerful and then seeps down into the soul of the common man. As Zahak's demonic reign tightened its grip, the moral fabric of the Persian court began to unravel. The halls that once echoed with the poetry of Jamshid's golden age now whispered with fear and sycophancy. The nobles and advisors who surrounded the Serpent King were not necessarily evil men at their core, but they were men who valued survival above honor. They became the silent collaborators, the functionaries of atrocity, who stood by as the nation's youth were marched to their deaths day after day. Their silence was a form of consent, their inaction a buttress to the throne of snakes. This silent acquiescence reached its nadir when Zahak, plagued by a prophetic dream of his own demise, sought to create a document that would legitimize his rule in the eyes of the world and, perhaps, in his own terrified mind. He dreamed of 3 warriors, one a youth brandishing an ox-headed mace who would attack and bind him, dragging him to be imprisoned in a mountain. Terrified, he gathered the elders and leaders of the land, men of influence and reputation, and demanded they sign a proclamation. This document was a masterpiece of Orwellian propaganda, a testament that declared Zahak to be a benevolent, just, and magnanimous sovereign. It was a public lie designed to whitewash a reign of blood, a formal declaration that the monster was a savior. One by one, the leaders of the land, their faces masks of strained loyalty, affixed their seals to the parchment. They did so out of fear for their lives, knowing that to refuse was to sentence themselves and their families to a gruesome end. They chose the path of the decadent heir, the cowardly courtier, sacrificing truth on the altar of self-preservation. This act of collective cowardice was, in many ways, more damning than Zahak's own evil. It demonstrated how tyranny perpetuates itself not merely through the actions of the tyrant, but through the complicity of the powerful. The document, filled with the signatures of the realm's most respected men, stood as a monument to a broken spirit, a society that had forgotten how to speak truth to power. It was into this chamber of lies, this hall of capitulation, that the unyielding force of the common man was about to erupt. A single voice of dissent was all that was needed to shatter the carefully constructed facade of legitimacy, and that voice belonged to a man who had already paid the ultimate price for Zahak's rule. Into the suffocating silence of Zahak's court strode an unlikely figure, a man whose name was not written in any royal lineage but was etched on the heart of the common people, Kaveh the Blacksmith. He was not a nobleman, a general, or a sage. He was an archetype of the working man, his life defined by the fire of the forge and the sweat of his brow. Yet, on this day, he was transformed. He was no longer merely a craftsman. He was the embodiment of righteous fury, a father whose grief had been hammered into a weapon of defiance. The monstrous appetite of Zahak's serpents had consumed 17 of Kaveh's 18 sons, a loss that had hollowed him out, leaving only a core of unquenchable rage. Now, the king's gods had come for his last remaining child, the final light of his life. For Kaveh, this was not a political issue, it was the final violation, the snapping of the last thread of his endurance. He marched directly into the palace, past the stunned guards and into the throne room, his blacksmith's hammer still in hand, a symbol of his trade and, now, his rebellion. He did not bow, he did not supplicate, he roared. He stood before the Serpent King and loudly protested the seizure of his son, his voice echoing with the pain of 1,000 bereaved fathers. The sheer audacity of his defiance stunned the court into silence. Zahak, taken aback by this raw and fearless display of grief, was momentarily disarmed. In a rare and calculated act of public relations, the tyrant ordered Kaveh's son to be released. But it came with a price. Zahak, ever the manipulator, then presented Kaveh with the proclamation of his own benevolence, the document already signed by the cowed nobility, and asked the blacksmith to add his name to recognize the king's generosity and justice. It was a test of Kave's spirit, an attempt to co-opt his grief and turn his compliance into a powerful symbol of the people's consent. Zahak sought to transform the everyman hero into just another silent accomplice, but Kaveh was forged of a different metal. He took the parchment, read the vile lies it contained, and with a cry of pure, unadulterated rage, he tore the document to shreds before the astonished court. He then turned his fury upon the silent courtiers, scolding them as cowards and collaborators serving a demonic monster. In that singular act, the blacksmith shattered the illusion of legitimacy and exposed the terror that held the kingdom in its thrall. Having torn the tyrant's lies to shreds, Kaveh the Blacksmith committed an act that would forever alter the course of history and create one of the most enduring symbols of rebellion in the world. He stormed out of Zahak's court, his freed son at his side, his heart a blazing furnace of righteous indignation. But his defiance was not a fleeting outburst. It was the spark that would ignite a nationwide conflagration. Reaching the city square amidst the fearful and downtrodden populace, Kaveh performed a gesture of profound symbolic power. He took off his leather apron, the simple, utilitarian garment of his trade, stained with the soot and sweat of honest labor, and hoisted it onto the tip of a spear. In that moment, the mundane was made sacred. The blacksmith's apron, a representation of the common man's toil and suffering, became a banner of revolution. This was the birth of the Derafsh Kaviani, the standard of Kaveh. It was a flag born not of silk and gold, but of leather and grief. Its message was unmistakable and resonated with the oppressed masses. Kaveh, holding this makeshift standard aloft, called upon the people to rise up, to shed their fear and join together to overthrow the demonic tyrant who had preyed upon their children for so long. His call to action, amplified by the potent symbol of the leather apron, was the moment the soul of the nation, long dormant, reawakened. People, inspired by his courage and recognizing their own suffering in his defiant gesture, began to flock to his banner. The rebellion was no longer a blacksmith's solitary cry of anguish. It was becoming a movement, a popular uprising that drew its strength not from armies and treasuries, but from the collective will of a people who had decided they would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. The Derafsh Kaviani was more than a flag. It was the personification of the people's struggle, a testament to the idea that the tools of labor could be transformed into the instruments of liberation. For centuries to come, this humble leather apron, later adorned with jewels by grateful kings, would remain the symbol of Persian sovereignty and the unyielding spirit of resistance against tyranny. Kaveh, the archetypal hero of the working class, had given the formless yearning for freedom a tangible and powerful form. While the blacksmith's rage was igniting the flame of popular revolt in the cities, destiny was moving another, equally important piece onto the board. The prophecy that had so terrified Zahak spoke of a specific hero, a man of royal blood who was destined to wield the ox-headed mace and bring an end to the Serpent King's reign. This figure was Feridun, a descendant of the great king Jamshid, the very lineage that Zahak had usurped. Feridun was the visionary founder reborn, a figure of legitimate authority destined to restore the divine Far to the throne of Iran. His early life was a study in secrecy and divine protection. Zahak, obsessed with the prophecy of his downfall, had launched a kingdom-wide search for the child who was fated to destroy him. Feridun's father, Abtain, was captured and killed by Zahak's agents, a martyr to the tyrant's paranoia. His mother, Fadanak, desperate to save her son, fled with the infant Feridun into hiding. She first entrusted him to the care of a farmer in the verdant fields of Mazandaran, where he was nourished by the milk of a wondrous cow, a creature of mythical beauty and power. This pastoral upbringing connected the future king to the land and its people in a way that no palace ever could. However, Zahak's spies were relentless, and soon they heard whispers of this magical bovine. The tyrant, in his madness, came to the region and slaughtered the beautiful creature, a senseless act of destruction that only served to foreshadow his own end. Tyranny, warned of the approaching danger, once again took her son and fled, this time seeking refuge in the remote and inaccessible Alborz Mountains. There, she gave him into the care of a wise hermit, a figure representing ancient wisdom and spiritual fortitude, who raised the young Feridun far from the corrupting influence of Zahak's world. It was in this wilderness sanctuary that Feridun came of age, growing into a young man of immense strength and noble character, unaware of the prophecy that hung over his head, but feeling the pull of a great destiny. His very existence was a hidden threat to the Serpent King, a promise of justice nurtured in the untamed heart of the land, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The convergence of popular uprising and destined leadership is the critical reaction that fuels a successful revolution. Kaveh, the great organizer, understood that rage alone, no matter how righteous, was not enough to topple a 1,000-year tyranny. His movement, symbolized by the Derafsh Kaviani, had a heart and a voice, but it lacked a unifying head, a figure of legitimate authority around whom the disparate forces of rebellion could coalesce. He knew that to challenge a king, even a demonic one, they needed a king of their own. Having rallied a significant following, Kaveh led his burgeoning army of citizens away from the cities and toward the Alborz Mountains. Their destination was the rumored hiding place of Feridun, the last scion of the rightful royal line. The blacksmith, the heart of the people, was seeking the prince, the symbol of divine right, to create a perfect fusion of popular will and legitimate power. When Kaveh and his followers found Feridun, now a youth of 16, he was a figure radiating innate nobility and strength. He had recently learned the truth of his lineage and the story of his father's murder from his mother Tyranny, and the desire for vengeance was already stirring in his heart. The arrival of Kaveh's revolutionary force was the catalyst that turned this personal desire for revenge into a national crusade. The blacksmith and the prince met, and in that meeting, the revolution was truly born. Kaveh and his followers, recognizing in Feridun the sun-like splendor of the divine Fa, the royal grace that had been absent from the land for so long, immediately proclaimed him their king. The common man, through his chosen representative, anointed the rightful ruler. Feridun, in turn, accepted the charge, agreeing to lead the people against Zahak. He embraced Kaveh's leather apron as the official banner of his cause, a profound gesture that forever linked the legitimacy of his rule to the will of the common people. The Derafsh Kaviani was no longer just the standard of a blacksmith rebellion, it was now the royal standard of the true king of Iran. This alliance was the perfect embodiment of a just war. The strength of the people, guided by the wisdom of a righteous leader, a storm of collective fury focused by the lens of destiny. With the alliance between the destined king and the people's champion solidified, the revolution transitioned from a scattered uprising into a disciplined military campaign. Feridun, though young, possessed an innate understanding of both symbolic and practical warfare. His first act as the declared king was to prepare a weapon that would be as iconic as Kaveh's banner. He ordered the smiths in his army to forge a special mace for him, a mighty weapon whose head was shaped like that of an ox. This was no arbitrary design, it was a direct and powerful allusion to the prophecy that haunted Zahak's dreams, the vision of a hero wielding just such a weapon. It was also a tribute to the mythical cow that had nourished him in his infancy, a symbol of the life-giving force of the land rising up against the death-dealing tyrant. The ox-headed mace became the complementary symbol to the leather apron, one representing the righteous authority of the destined king, the other the collective will of the people. Armed with this prophetic weapon and marching under the Derafsh Kaviani, Feridun led his army out of the mountains. The force was a motley collection of outraged citizens, hardened blacksmiths, and provincial warriors, all united by a common cause and inspired by the dual leadership of the noble prince and the commoner hero. Their march was not a stealthy infiltration, but a bold and open advance, a river of revolution flowing down from the highlands to cleanse the corrupted plains. They crossed the Avon River, a major geographical and symbolic boundary, and headed directly for Zahak's capital. The news of their approach spread like wildfire, a message of hope for the oppressed and a death knell for the collaborators. The tyrant, in a stroke of fortune for the rebels, was away from the palace, perhaps scouring the countryside for more victims or quelling dissent in a distant province. The capital, the very heart of the Serpent's empire, was left vulnerable. The march of Feridun's army was deliberate and rhythmic, a swelling crescendo in the epic score of the revolution, each step a beat in the funeral drum of a thousand-year tyranny. The brilliant general, in this case a youth guided by destiny, was about to strike a decisive blow not through complex strategy, but through the sheer, irresistible force of a just cause made manifest. The assault on Zahak's capital was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a demonstration that the true weakness of a tyrannical regime is the hollowness of its support. When Feridun and his army arrived at the gates of the fortress-like city, they were met with a surprisingly feeble defense. The power of Zahak was built on fear, not loyalty, and with the tyrant himself absent, the will of his garrison crumbled in the face of a determined and popular army. Feridun, leading the charge with his ox-headed mace held high, was an awe-inspiring sight, a living prophecy come to claim his birthright. The gates were smashed, and the rebel forces poured into the city, not as conquerors, but as liberators. They met little resistance. Many of the city's inhabitants, emboldened by the arrival of the revolutionary army, turned on their oppressors, attacking Zahak's soldiers from the rooftops and in the alleyways. It was a city liberating itself, with Feridun's army acting as the catalyst. The young king marched directly to the opulent and profane palace, a monument to 1,000 years of terror. Inside, he did not engage in wanton destruction, but in acts of symbolic restoration. His first priority was to find and release the thousands of prisoners who languished in Zahak's dungeons, men and women who had been condemned for dissent or were simply waiting to become food for the serpents. This act immediately solidified his status as a just and merciful ruler. He then sought out the two most high-profile captives in the palace, Shahnameh and Arnavaz, the daughters of the fallen king Jamshid, who had been forced to become Zahak's slaves and nominal wives to legitimize his usurpation. Feridun freed them from their bondage and, in a powerful act of restoring the rightful lineage, seated them beside him on the throne. The message was clear: the old legitimate order was being re-established. Kondrol, Zahak's royal treasurer and a consummate opportunist, feigned submission to Feridun, hoping to preserve his position in the new regime. But his loyalty was as false as his master's claim to the throne. The capture of the capital was a swift and resounding victory, achieved with minimal bloodshed, demonstrating that the Serpent's empire, for all its monstrous power, was a colossus with feet of clay ready to crumble at the first touch of genuine courage. The news of his capital's fall reached Zahak like a physical blow, a serpent's hiss of disbelief and rage. The loss of his throne, the liberation of his prisoners, and the enthronement of Jamshid's daughters by a young upstart was an intolerable humiliation. Abandoning his provincial campaigns, the Serpent King amassed his great army and marched with furious speed back toward his city, intending to crush the rebellion in one decisive, brutal stroke. He arrived to find the capital transformed. The city that had once cowered under his shadow was now a bastion of defiance, its walls manned by Feridun's soldiers and its streets filled with a populace that had tasted freedom and would not surrender it. Zahak's army, a formidable force of mercenaries and conscripts held together by fear and plunder, crashed against the city's defenses like a storm tide against a rocky shore. The siege that followed was brutal, but the dynamic of power had fundamentally shifted. The defenders fought with the ferocity of people protecting their homes and their newfound hope, while Zahak's soldiers fought only for a master they feared. The brilliant general Feridun orchestrated the defense with a wisdom that belied his years, but it was the spirit of Kaveh, the spirit of the people, that truly animated the city's resistance. Seeing that his army could not breach the walls, Zahak's rage turned to cunning. His fight was not with the city, but with the man who had stolen it. In a desperate and cowardly move, he disguised himself, sneaking into his own palace through a secret entrance, his mind set on a single goal: assassination. He intended to murder Shahnameh and Arnavaz, the symbols of the restored lineage, and perhaps Feridun himself, hoping to decapitate the revolution and send the city into chaos. It was the act of a tyrant who could only think in terms of personal power and revenge, unable to comprehend that he was not fighting a man, but an idea whose time had come. This clandestine infiltration of his own sanctum was the ultimate admission of his defeat. The king was now a trespasser in his own home, a phantom of a dying regime, about to face the living embodiment of justice. The final confrontation was not a clash of armies, but an intensely personal duel between the archetypal tyrant and the destined hero, played out in the corrupted heart of the palace. As Zahak, the decadent heir of a stolen throne, crept through the halls he once ruled, intent on murder, he was confronted by Feridun. The young king, perhaps warned by a divine premonition or simply ever vigilant, stood waiting for him, his ox-headed mace held ready. The sight of Feridun, the living fulfillment of his most dreaded nightmare, sent Zahak into a demonic rage. With his shoulder serpents hissing and writhing, he lunged at the young king, the power of 1,000 years of evil behind his strike. The battle that ensued was titanic, a whirlwind of steel and fury that shook the very foundations of the throne room. Zahak fought with the desperate strength of a cornered beast, while Feridun moved with the grace and certainty of a man executing the will of heaven. The presence of Kaveh and his sons at Feridun's side during this final confrontation underscored the unity of the cause. The people and their rightful king stood together against the ultimate evil. In a climactic moment, Feridun raised his mace, the weapon of prophecy, and brought it down upon Zahak's head. The blow was perfectly struck, shattering the tyrant's helmet and sending him crashing to the floor, stunned and defeated. The prophecy was fulfilled. The youngest of the three warriors from his dream had delivered the immobilizing blow. Feridun's instinct was to finish the monster then and there, to cleanse the world of his evil with a final, fatal strike. But as he raised the mace for the killing blow, a divine messenger, an angel named Sorush, appeared before him, staying his hand. The angel's message was clear: Zahak was not to be killed. Death would be too merciful a release for him, and, according to some interpretations, his death would unleash a plague of vermin from his corrupted body upon the world. His fate was to be something far worse than a clean end. He was to become a living monument to defeated tyranny, a perpetual warning for all ages to come. Justice, in this case, demanded not annihilation, but an eternity of suffering. Following the divine command, Feridun spared Zahak's life, choosing instead a fate of eternal damnation that would serve as a timeless lesson to all who would follow the path of tyranny. The Serpent King, dazed and broken, was bound not with ordinary ropes, but with a lion's pelt, a symbol of royal power now used to restrain a fallen monarch. The chains that had once held so many of his innocent victims were now used to shackle him, a poetic justice that resonated through the liberated halls of the palace. The victorious Feridun, accompanied by Kaveh and the heroes of the rebellion, led the captive tyrant out of the city, not in a parade of triumph, but in a solemn procession toward the place of his final judgment. The destination was the great and mythical Mount Damavand, the highest peak in the land, a place of spiritual power and awe-inspiring majesty. This was the very mountain that had featured in Zahak's prophetic dream, the place where he had foreseen his own imprisonment. As they ascended the formidable slopes, they found a deep and lightless cave, a wound in the side of the mountain that seemed to lead to the very bowels of the earth. It was here, in this dark and lonely place, that Zahak's eternal prison was prepared. Feridun, using great iron spikes, nailed the tyrant to the cavern walls, binding him so securely that he could never break free. There, in the cold and the dark, the once mighty emperor was left to hang in his chains. The whispers of the wind, his only company, the gnawing hunger of his own serpents, his only sensation. He was doomed to remain there until the end of the world, a sentient statue of evil, a perpetual prisoner whose cries would echo only in legend. The imprisonment of Zahak in Mount Damavand is one of the most powerful metaphors in the epic. It represents the idea that evil can be contained, that it can be overcome and locked away by the forces of good, but that its potential presence always remains, a sleeping volcano of malice deep within the earth, a constant reminder of the vigilance required to maintain freedom and justice. With the living embodiment of tyranny sealed within the heart of the mountain, Feridun returned not as a conqueror, but as a restorer. His first priority was to systematically dismantle the machinery of oppression and erase the lingering stain of Zahak's 1,000-year reign. This was not a task of vengeance, but of purification, a meticulous effort to heal the soul of a nation that had been grievously wounded. The young king, now firmly established on the throne, began by instituting a new era of justice and generosity, the very virtues that Zahak's rule had despised. He established a just legal code, ensuring that the rights of the common people so long trampled upon were now protected by the authority of the crown. The courtiers and officials who had collaborated with the old regime were likely purged or re-educated, the culture of sycophancy replaced with one of honest counsel. The palaces and cities, once monuments to a tyrant's ego, were rededicated to the public good. Feridun's rule, which would last for 500 years, was envisioned as a new golden age, a deliberate and conscious return to the ideals of the early reign of his ancestor, Jamshid, but tempered with the humility of one who had seen the consequences of arrogance. A key part of this restoration was the establishment of a new festival, Mehagan, celebrated on the day of Zahak's defeat. This festival of autumn became a national holiday, a time for the people to rejoice in the triumph of good over evil and to celebrate the bounty of the land, now free from the blight of a demonic king. It was a powerful act of cultural engineering, replacing the daily ritual of fear with an annual ritual of joyous remembrance. The very air, it was said, seemed lighter, as if the physical weight of Zahak's corruption had been lifted from the wind itself. Feridun, the visionary founder, guided by the wisdom of his experiences in exile and the courage of the people embodied by Kaveh, proceeded to build a kingdom where justice, peace, and prosperity could once again flourish, closing the dark chapter of the Serpent King and allowing the world to breathe free. The tale of Kaveh the Blacksmith and his rebellion against the tyrant Zahak is not merely a story, it is a foundational myth, a piece of cultural DNA that has profoundly shaped the Persian consciousness for millennia. Its legacy is not confined to the pages of Ferdowsi's 10th century epic, the Shahnameh, but is a living, breathing narrative that continues to resonate in the art, politics, and social struggles of modern Iran. Kaveh himself is revered as a national hero, the ultimate symbol of the common man's courage and the powerful idea that any citizen, no matter how humble, has the right and the duty to rise up against injustice. He is the archetypal revolutionary from the working class, a figure who inspires not with divine right, but with the moral authority of his righteous anger. His story serves as a potent and perennial reminder that the true strength of a nation lies not in its king or its armies, but in the indomitable spirit of its people. The Derafsh Kaviani, the leather apron he raised on a spear, transcended its humble origins to become the national banner of Iran for centuries, a symbol of sovereignty and resistance carried into battle by successive Persian dynasties. Though the original jewel-encrusted banner was eventually captured and destroyed by Arab invaders after the fall of the Sasanian Empire, its memory and its meaning could not be eradicated. The image of the blacksmith's apron remains a powerful symbol of defiance against tyranny, both foreign and domestic. In times of political unrest and oppression throughout Iranian history, from ancient rebellions to modern protests, the figures of Kaveh and Zahak are invoked time and again. Protesters have chanted slogans comparing authoritarian leaders to Zahak, while seeing themselves as the inheritors of Kaveh's legacy. The story provides a timeless political allegory. Zahak as the bloodthirsty dictator who sacrifices the nation's youth to maintain his grip on power, and Kaveh as the symbol of the people's fight for freedom. This enduring narrative has become a cultural touchstone, shaping the collective identity of a people who see in this ancient myth the reflection of their own ongoing struggle for justice, freedom, and national dignity. The narrative of Kaveh and Zahak is a masterwork of archetypal storytelling, a conflict that transcends its specific cultural origins to speak to universal truths about power, courage, and the human condition. At its core, it is a clash between two opposing forces, each personified by a figure who embodies a timeless archetype. Zahak is the quintessential tyrant, but he is more than just a cruel ruler. He represents the corrupting nature of illegitimate power, a leader who comes to the throne through patricide and a demonic pact. The snakes on his shoulders are a brilliant and grotesque metaphor for the insatiable nature of tyranny. A regime born of violence must perpetually feed on violence to sustain itself. His daily demand for the brains of the youth is a chillingly accurate allegory for how despotic systems consume the future of a nation, its young people, its ideas, its vitality, to fuel the monstrous ego of the present regime. He is the decadent heir, not of a legitimate throne, but of a stolen one, and his entire reign is an exercise in maintaining power through fear and lies. In stark opposition stands Kaveh, the archetypal everyman hero. He is not a prince or a warrior by birth, but a simple blacksmith, a representative of the working class, the very backbone of the nation. His heroism is not born of ambition or a desire for glory, but is thrust upon him by personal tragedy. He is the reluctant hero, driven to action only when the horror of the state intrudes upon the sanctity of his family. His weapon is not a sword, but his hammer. His banner is not of silk, but his leather apron. These symbols are crucial. They ground the rebellion in the authenticity of common experience and honest labor. Feridun serves as the third critical archetype, the rightful king or the visionary founder. He represents legitimacy, justice, and the divine order that Zahak has perverted. While Kaveh is the heart and fire of the revolution, Feridun is its head and its claim to authority. The story's brilliance lies in its assertion that a successful revolution requires both the passionate, righteous fury of the common people, Kaveh, and the legitimate, organizing principle of a just leader, Feridun. Without Feridun, Kaveh's revolt might have been just a riot. Without Kaveh, Feridun's claim to the throne would have lacked popular power. Together, they form a complete and irresistible force for change. The symbolism woven throughout the Kaveh and Zahak legend is dense and multi-layered, elevating a compelling story into a profound meditation on the nature of good and evil. The most powerful symbol, of course, is Zahak's serpents. growing from the spot where the devil kissed him. They are a permanent physical mark of his pact with evil, a monstrous deformity that makes his inner corruption visible to the world. They represent insatiable hunger, not just for food, but for life, for power, for the future of the nation itself. The fact that they can only be appeased by the brains of the young is a stark metaphor for how tyranny destroys intellect, creativity, and the next generation to ensure its own survival. The serpents are a part of Zahak. He cannot be separated from them, just as a tyrannical system cannot be separated from the violence and fear that sustains it. In direct contrast stands the Derafsh Kaviani, Kaveh's leather blacksmith apron. This is a symbol of immense power precisely because of its humility. It represents the dignity of labor, the value of the common man, and the idea that the tools of creation can be repurposed for the cause of liberation. It is a flag of the people, stained with sweat, not blood. When Feridun, the rightful king, adopts this apron as his royal standard, it symbolizes the sacred contract between a just ruler and his citizens, an acknowledgement that the monarch's power derives from the people's will. Feridun's ox-headed mace is another key symbol. It is the weapon of prophecy, the instrument of destiny. Its connection to Bir Maye, the cow that nourished Feridun, links the hero to the forces of nature, life, and sustenance, positioning his fight as a restoration of the natural order against Zahak's unnatural, demonic reign. Finally, Mount Damavand serves as a potent geographical and mythological symbol. As the prison of Zahak, it represents the containment of evil. The legend suggests that evil is not annihilated, but can be subdued and imprisoned by courage and justice. Damavand is a constant, looming reminder of the defeated tyrant, a symbol of both the victory of good and the eternal vigilance required to keep evil chained. Together, these symbols create a rich allegorical tapestry that explains not just the events of the story, but the deeper philosophical and political truths that underpin it. The narrative structure of the Kaveh and Zahak story, as immortalized in the Shahnameh, follows a classic epic pattern that gives it a deliberate, rhythmic, and immensely satisfying flow. It is a perfect linear chronological arc, a cause and effect historical narrative that methodically builds context and tension. The story begins not with the hero, but with the genesis of the villain, a technique that establishes the stakes and the sheer scale of the evil that must be overcome. We witness the fall of the flawed but brilliant King Jamshid, an act of foreshadowing that creates the power vacuum for tyranny to fill. Then comes the rise of Zahak, a slow and chilling consolidation of power marked by patricide, demonic pacts, and the monstrous sprouting of the shoulder serpents. This section establishes the nature of his oppressive rule and the horrific daily sacrifice that defines his reign. The narrative then deliberately shifts focus from the court of the tyrant to the home of the common man, introducing Kaveh and the personal cost of Zahak's evil. The loss of his 17 sons builds a sense of unbearable tension, leading to the dramatic climax in the throne room, where his personal grief explodes into public defiance. This defiance launches the next phase, the popular uprising. The raising of the Derafsh Kaviani and the gathering of the people represents the consolidation of the rebellion's power. The story then introduces its third major character, Feridun, the destined hero, and details his secret upbringing, logically explaining his appearance as a figure of legitimate authority. The alliance of Kaveh and Feridun marks the story's golden age of hope, the fusion of popular will and righteous leadership. The narrative momentum then swells into the major conflict, the march on the capital, the swift victory, and the final epic battle between Feridun and Zahak. The climax is not the tyrant's death, but his capture and imprisonment, a more contemplative and thematically resonant outcome. The final phase details the decline of the old order and the transformation of the new, with Feridun erasing the traces of tyranny and establishing a just kingdom. This structure is bookended by the themes of kingship. It begins with the failure of one king, Jamshid, and ends with the triumph of a new, more righteous one, Feridun, with the common man, Kaveh, serving as the essential bridge between the two. This deliberate, measured pacing gives the legend the weight and inevitability of a cinematic epic, ensuring that every stage of the conflict is fully developed, creating a powerful and enduring historical narrative. The legend of Kaveh and Zahak, while a cornerstone of Persian mythology, also possesses tantalizing, albeit speculative, connections to actual historical events and figures, grounding its epic narrative in the faint echoes of real-world struggles. Some historians have proposed that the story may be a mythological retelling of conflicts between different peoples and ideologies in ancient Iran. The character of Zahak, often described as an Arab or foreign ruler, could be a personification of an oppressive foreign power that once dominated the Iranian plateau. His tyranny might be a collective memory of a historical period of subjugation. One specific theory suggests that the myth originated during the time of the Median Empire in western Iran, and that Zahak is a legendary stand-in for the unpopular Median king Astyages. Astyages was overthrown by Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, around 5050 BCE. In this interpretation, the hero Feridun could be a mythological reflection of Cyrus, a liberator king who united the Persian and Median peoples and established a more just rule. While Feridun is a mythical figure, his character as a unifier and restorer of justice aligns well with the historical reputation of Cyrus the Great. The figure of Kaveh, however, is not mentioned in early religious texts and appears to be a later addition to the legend, first appearing in his fully developed form in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh. This suggests that the character of the blacksmith hero may have been created or elaborated upon during the Sasanian era, or later, possibly to create a symbol of national unity and popular resistance that would resonate with the common people. The Derafsh Kaviani, however, may have older roots. The symbol of the lotus flower associated with the banner is an ancient Persian motif, and the concept of a royal standard was central to Achaemenid and later Persian armies. It's plausible that a historical banner was mythologized, its origins tied to the popular hero Kaveh to create a more powerful national symbol. While it is impossible to draw direct, verifiable lines between the myth and specific historical events, the story's enduring power lies in its ability to encapsulate the recurring themes of Iranian history, resistance against foreign invasion, the struggle against domestic tyranny, and the deep cultural desire for a just and righteous ruler. The legend serves as a kind of poetic, archetypal history, reflecting the spirit, if not the precise facts, of millennia of Persian experience. The narrative of Kaveh's uprising and Feridun's triumph is a powerful political allegory that explores the fundamental principles of just governance and the nature of legitimate power. It presents a sophisticated and enduring model of the ideal relationship between the ruler and the ruled. The story implicitly argues that true sovereignty is not merely a matter of bloodline or military might, but is a sacred trust, a contract between the king and his people. The concept of the Fa, or divine grace, is central to this allegory. King Jamshid possesses it until his arrogance causes him to lose it, signifying that legitimacy is conditional and can be withdrawn if a ruler becomes unjust and hubristic. Zahak never possesses the Fa. His rule is based entirely on illegitimate force and a demonic pact, making him the epitome of the anti-king. His reign is a perversion of the natural order, which is why the land itself seems to suffer under his dominion. The hero Feridun, by contrast, is recognized by the people because he radiates the Fa. His legitimacy comes not just from his lineage, but from his inherent virtue, a quality that the people, led by Kaveh, instinctively recognize. The story's most radical political statement is the role it assigns to the common man, Kaveh. It is not a prince or a prophet who initiates the change, but a blacksmith who has been personally wronged by the state. Kaveh's rebellion establishes the principle that the people have a right, indeed, a duty, to resist a tyrannical ruler. He is the active agent of the people's will. However, the story does not advocate for anarchy or mob rule. Kaveh, having ignited the rebellion, immediately seeks out the rightful king, Feridun. This act is crucial. It demonstrates that the goal of the popular uprising is not to destroy the monarchy, but to restore it to its just and proper state. The ideal government, according to the allegory, is a partnership. The king provides legitimate authority, wisdom, and leadership, but he must earn and maintain the support of the people. Feridun's first act of adopting Kaveh's leather apron as the royal standard is the symbolic sealing of this contract. It is a visual promise that he will never forget the source of his power and that he will rule in the interests of the common man who placed him on the throne. The allegory of Kaveh and Zahak is, therefore, a timeless blueprint for a just society, one that balances the authority of the state with the rights of the citizen and warns that when that balance is broken, rebellion is not only inevitable, but righteous. The influence of the Kaveh and Zahak myth extends beyond the borders of Iran, echoing in the folklore and national identity of neighboring cultures, most notably among the Kurdish people. In Kurdish mythology, the figure of Kaveh, known as Kaveh the Blacksmith, Kaveh a singer, is a central and revered hero. The Kurdish version of the legend shares the same core narrative. Kaveh leads a popular uprising against a cruel, snake-shouldered tyrant named Zahak, or Dohak. However, the myth holds a specific and profound significance for Kurdish identity, as it is tied to their very origin story. According to some Kurdish traditions, the ancestors of the Kurdish people were the young men who were saved from being sacrificed to Zahak's serpents. In this telling, two righteous men working in Zahak's kitchens would secretly substitute a ram's brain for one of the human brains each day, allowing one youth to escape. These escapees fled into the Zagros Mountains, a region that is the heart of the Kurdish homeland, and became the progenitors of the Kurdish people. This version of the myth transforms the story from a general allegory of resistance into a specific ethnogenesis, positioning the Kurds as a people forged in the act of escaping tyranny. Furthermore, the celebration of Newroz, the Persian New Year, on the spring equinox holds a special meaning in Kurdish culture, where it is explicitly linked to Kaveh's victory over Zahak. For many Kurds, Newroz is not just the start of a new year, it is a celebration of liberation. It is said that after defeating Zahak, Kaveh lit a bonfire on a hilltop to signal the victory to his followers in the mountains, an act that is commemorated by the lighting of fires across Kurdistan during Newroz celebrations. This tradition makes Newroz a powerful symbol of Kurdish resistance, and the perennial hope for freedom and self-determination. The figure of Kaveh the Blacksmith has become a potent icon of Kurdish nationalism, his story invoked in literature, art, and political discourse as a symbol of their long struggle against oppression. While the story's roots are in a shared Iranian mythological tradition, its unique adaptation within Kurdish culture highlights how a powerful archetype can be embraced and reshaped to fit the specific historical experiences and national aspirations of a people. The story of Kaveh the Blacksmith's heroic defiance has been immortalized, not just in the text of the Shahnameh, but in the rich tapestry of Persian visual arts, particularly in the exquisite tradition of manuscript illustration. For centuries, the Shahnameh has been one of the most frequently and lavishly illustrated texts in the Persian world, with wealthy patrons commissioning opulent copies as a mark of cultural sophistication and royal legitimacy. The scenes from the Kaveh and Zahak narrative are among the most popular and dramatic subjects for these miniature paintings. These illustrations are not mere decorations. They are sophisticated visual interpretations of the text, cinematic freeze frames that capture the emotional and narrative climax of the story. One of the most frequently depicted scenes is the moment of Kaveh's confrontation with Zahak in the throne room. Artists often portray Zahak as a monstrous figure, the snakes on his shoulders writhing menacingly, seated on an ornate throne that emphasizes his corrupt power. In contrast, Kaveh is shown as a figure of raw, dynamic energy, often with his blacksmith's hammer raised or in the act of tearing the tyrant's proclamation. His simple, commoner's clothing stands in stark contrast to the decadent silks of the court, visually reinforcing the story's central theme of common honesty versus corrupt royalty. Another iconic image is Kaveh in the city square, raising the Derafsh Kaviani. This scene is often depicted as a moment of dynamic action, with crowds of people flocking to the blacksmith's banner, their faces a mixture of hope and awe. The leather apron, the focal point of the composition, is rendered as a powerful symbol, its humble origins clear even as it becomes the rallying point for a nation. The final battle between Feridun and Zahak is also a favorite subject, allowing artists to showcase their skill in depicting dramatic action and mythological grandeur. Feridun, with his heroic stance and iconic ox-headed mace, is often shown striking down the demonic Zahak in a composition filled with energy and divine purpose. The most celebrated illustrated copy of the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp, created in the 16th century, contains masterful examples of these scenes, with their jewel-like colors, meticulous detail, and balanced compositions embodying the pinnacle of Persian manuscript painting. These miniatures have played a crucial role in keeping the legend alive, translating Ferdowsi's poetic language into a powerful and accessible visual narrative that has captivated audiences for centuries and cemented the images of the hero, the tyrant, and the banner of freedom in the collective cultural memory. The tale of Kaveh and Zahak offers a profound and surprisingly modern exploration of the psychology of tyranny. It delves into the inner world of the tyrant, portraying him not as a one-dimensional monster, but as a figure whose evil is the result of a series of psychological and moral failings. Zahak's journey begins with a fundamental character flaw, an insecure ambition coupled with a susceptibility to flattery. He is easily manipulated, a young man whose desire for power outweighs his moral compass. The devil, Ahriman, does not need to use brute force to corrupt him. He uses seduction, appealing to Zahak's ego and appetites. The introduction of meat to his diet symbolizes the awakening of a more primal, predatory nature, while the pact to kill his father shows a complete severing of natural human bonds in favor of personal advancement. The snakes that grow from his shoulders can be interpreted as a psychological metaphor for a consuming paranoia and narcissism. They are extensions of himself that must be fed at all costs, just as a tyrant's ego and fear demand constant appeasement through the suffering of others. His rule is characterized by a deep-seated terror of being overthrown, a fear that is given form in his prophetic dream. This dream reveals the tyrant's deepest anxiety, that he is illegitimate and that a rightful challenger will one day appear. His reaction to the dream is not to reform his ways, but to launch a paranoid witch hunt for the prophesied child, Feridun, a classic example of a tyrant attempting to defy fate and control the future through violence. His demand that the nobles sign a proclamation of his benevolence is another key psychological insight. It shows the tyrant's need for the external validation of his own lies. He cannot simply be powerful. He must be seen as just, even if it requires forcing his subjects to participate in a collective fantasy. This creates a world built on falsehood, where virtue is despised and falsehood is exalted. In the end, Zahak is a hollow figure, a man who has sacrificed his own humanity for power and is now a slave to the very evil that he embraced. His imprisonment in the mountain is a fitting end for a consciousness trapped in its own self-made hell, a mind consumed by a hunger that can never be sated and a fear that can never be assuaged. The story serves as a timeless case study in the making of a monster, suggesting that the most terrifying tyrants are not born, but are slowly and deliberately self-created through a series of choices that corrupt the soul. The character of Kaveh the Blacksmith represents a powerful and enduring statement on the nature of true heroism. Unlike many epic heroes who are demigods, princes, or divinely chosen warriors from birth, Kaveh's heroism is entirely human and situational. He is an ordinary man who is transformed into an extraordinary figure by circumstance and moral choice. His defining characteristic is not superhuman strength, but profound courage. A courage born not of fearlessness, but of a love so deep that it overcomes fear. Kaveh does not seek out a fight. The fight is brought to his doorstep by an unjust state. For years he endures the unimaginable pain of losing his children one by one, a silent suffering shared by countless families in the kingdom. This period of endurance is critical to his character. It establishes him as a man of the people, one who has felt the full weight of the tyrant's oppression. His heroism is ignited at the breaking point, the moment when endurance becomes complicity. The demand for his final son is the catalyst that turns his private grief into a public cause. This is the essence of the everyman hero, a person who is representative of the collective, but is the first to find the courage to say no more. Kaveh's power does not come from a magic sword or a divine blessing, but from the moral clarity of his position. He has nothing left to lose, and this frees him to speak the truth without reservation. When he confronts Zahak, he does so not as a strategist or a politician, but as a father. His authority is not legal or military, it is the universally understood moral authority of a parent protecting their child. This authenticity is what makes his message so potent, and what allows him to galvanize the masses. He does not offer them promises of wealth or power. He offers them a shared identity of righteous indignation, symbolized by his leather apron. The story of Kaveh is a testament to the idea that the most powerful force for change in the world is not an army, but a single individual who, armed with the truth and fueled by love, decides that the cost of silence is too high. He is the eternal symbol of civic courage, a reminder that history is often changed not by the great and powerful, but by ordinary people who refuse to bow to injustice. The final act of the Kaveh and Zahak saga, the imprisonment rather than the execution of the tyrant, is a crucial and philosophically rich conclusion that elevates the narrative beyond a simple tale of revenge. The divine intervention that stays Feridun's hand introduces a complex moral calculus. The angel's warning that killing Zahak would infest the world with the vermin of his evil can be interpreted in several ways. On a literal mythological level, it suggests his body is so corrupted that its dissolution would be a biological plague. But on a deeper allegorical level, it speaks to the nature of evil itself. It suggests that the ideas and influences of a truly profound tyranny cannot be simply extinguished with the death of the tyrant. Killing Zahak might create a martyr or unleash the isms and ideologies he spawned, the metaphorical vermin to scatter and take root elsewhere. The act of imprisoning him is a more sophisticated form of justice. By binding him within Mount Damavand, Feridun contains the evil without becoming a killer himself. This act preserves the moral purity of the new king and his revolution. Feridun does not stoop to the tyrant's methods. He does not answer death with death. Instead, he chooses containment and eternal punishment, a judgment that is arguably more severe and just. This ending also serves as a powerful act of thematic bookending and a perpetual warning. The story begins with a king, Jamshid, who falls due to his own internal flaws. It ends with a new king, Feridun, who demonstrates his moral fitness to rule by showing restraint and wisdom in his moment of ultimate power. The imprisoned Zahak becomes a permanent fixture in the world's consciousness, a sleeping evil that serves as a constant reminder of what was fought against. He is the monster in the mountain, a symbol that freedom is not a final victory, but a state of constant vigilance. The knowledge that he is still there, chained in the darkness, ensures that the people and their future kings will never forget the price of liberty or the depths to which power can sink. It is a cautionary tale for all future generations, a warning that evil may be defeated and chained, but its memory and its potential must never be forgotten. The epic of Kaveh and Zahak operates on a grand cinematic scale, rich with implicit visual cues and metaphors that paint a vivid picture of a world locked in a struggle between light and darkness. The narrative does not need explicit direction, for the language itself is a series of powerful visual prompts. The reign of Zahak is depicted as a physical blight upon the land, a world where the sun itself seems dimmed by the smoke of funeral pyres and the air is thick with the scent of fear. His palace is a place of dark enchantments, its towers reaching toward the heavens not in aspiration but in profane ambition. The tyrant himself is a visceral image of horror, the two black snakes on his shoulders, a constantly writhing, sentient crown of evil, their heads darting out to be fed, a grotesque parody of a mother bird feeding her young. This is contrasted with the imagery of Kaveh's world, the honest, elemental fire of the blacksmith's forge, a place of creation and constructive power. The Derafsh Kaviani is a powerful visual metaphor, the scorched piece of leather against the sky, a stark, earthy symbol of defiance against the ornate, decadent banners of the court. The rebellion itself is visualized as a natural phenomenon, a storm gathering on the horizon, or a river of revolution flowing down from the mountains to cleanse the corrupted plains. These analogies frame the uprising not as a mere political event, but as a necessary and inevitable act of nature restoring its own balance. Feridun's sanctuary in the Alborz Mountains provides another set of powerful visuals, the pristine, untamed wilderness as a nursery for a hero, a place of purity far from the creeping rot of the city. His weapon, the ox-headed mace, is not just a tool of war, but a piece of symbolic art, its form invoking both the sacred cow that nourished him and the raw power of the earth. The final scene of Zahak's imprisonment is perhaps the most cinematic of all, the living monument to defeated tyranny, chained in a lightless cave, a sentient statue of evil against the cold, hard rock of the mountain. A final, chilling tableau that lingers in the mind's eye long after the story is told. The entire epic is a work of visual poetry, demanding to be seen as a grand, metaphorical film playing out on the screen of the imagination. The story of the blacksmith and the Serpent King is more than an ancient myth. It is an open loop, a question posed to every generation that encounters it. It asks, where does the responsibility to resist tyranny lie, and what is the true source of legitimate power? The narrative provides a clear, though challenging, answer. It posits that the catalyst for change is often found not in the halls of power, but in the crucible of common suffering. Kaveh, the archetypal hero, is not motivated by political theory or personal ambition, but by a grief that becomes unbearable. His story argues that the personal is political, that the violation of a single family can and should become the cause of a nation. This is a deeply democratic and populist sentiment, embedded in an epic about kings and heroes. The legend also offers a sophisticated commentary on the symbiosis of leadership. It suggests that popular revolt, in all its righteous fury, requires the guiding principle of just authority to succeed and build something new from the ashes of the old. The passion of Kaveh must be united with the legitimacy of Feridun. It is this fusion of the people's will with a rightful, virtuous leadership that creates a truly stable and just society. The Derafsh Kaviani, the humble apron accepted and revered by the new king, is the ultimate symbol of this sacred pact. The legacy of this story is its enduring relevance. In a world still grappling with despotism and injustice, the figures of Kaveh and Zahak remain powerful archetypes. Zahak is the ever-present face of the dictator who consumes the future to feed his present, a figure instantly recognizable in any era. Kaveh is the eternal hope of the oppressed, the proof that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else, family, justice, dignity, is more important. The story does not offer a simple, happy ending. The imprisonment of Zahak, rather than his destruction, serves as a final, somber reminder that the fight against tyranny is never truly over. Evil is chained, but it is not eradicated. Each generation must remain vigilant, ready to raise its own banner, be it of leather or of words, against the specter of the Serpent King. The loop remains open because the struggle it describes is a fundamental and ongoing part of the human condition. The narrative of Kaveh and Zahak, while epic in scope, is profoundly intimate in its emotional core, drawing its power from a spectrum of intense and primal feelings. The dominant emotional tone is one of high drama, a world of absolute stakes where the fate of a nation hangs in the balance. This is amplified by a sense of the epic, a story that unfolds over a vast timescale, a 1,000-year reign of terror, and involves forces of both human and supernatural origin. The early stages of the story are steeped in a growing sense of dread and tension. The corruption of Jamshid creates an atmosphere of unease, which curdles into outright horror with the rise of Zahak. The description of the serpents growing from his shoulders and their daily feeding creates a visceral feeling of revulsion and fear, establishing a palpable sense of a world gone wrong. The emotional heart of the story, however, is the tragic grief of Kaveh. The narrative forces the audience to confront the unimaginable pain of a father losing 17 children, building a deep well of empathy and shared outrage. This tragedy is the fuel for the story's emotional turning point. Kaveh's explosive fury in the court, a cathartic release of pent-up sorrow and anger that is both terrifying and deeply satisfying. As the rebellion gathers force, the emotional tone shifts to one of awe-inspiring hope. The meeting of Kaveh and Feridun, the raising of the Derafsh Kaviani, and the march on the capital are designed to stir feelings of triumph and popular empowerment. The battles are not just physically tense, they are morally charged, imbued with the sense that this is a righteous war, a cleansing of a profound evil. The final scenes introduce a more contemplative and somber emotional register. The decision not to kill Zahak is a moment of profound moral gravity, and his imprisonment in Mount Damavand evokes a sense of tragic, eternal justice. It is not a moment of gleeful victory, but a solemn and necessary act of restoring balance to the world. The story, therefore, is a complete emotional journey, guiding its audience from the depths of despair and horror, through the fire of righteous anger, to the heights of triumphant hope, and finally settling into a state of thoughtful, vigilant peace. The language employed in the telling of the Kaveh and Zahak legend is a masterful hybrid of styles, blending the elevated poetic prose of an epic with the clear narrative drive of a historical chronicle. The sentence structure is deliberately varied to control the pacing and emotional impact of the story. Long, complex sentences are used to build atmosphere and describe the grandeur of a king's court or the insidious, creeping nature of a demonic pact. These sentences, often laden with descriptive pauses and metaphorical language, create a cinematic feel, immersing the audience in the sensory details of the world. For example, a description of Zahak's reign might unfold in a single, flowing sentence that details the suffocating silence of his corrupted court, where fear coiled like a serpent in the heart of every courtier, and the very tapestries on the walls seemed to weep with the sorrow of 1,000 murdered sons. This style creates a deliberate, rhythmic pace, allowing tension and context to build methodically. Punctuating these longer, descriptive passages are short, powerful, declarative sentences. These are used for moments of high impact and dramatic emphasis. After a long description of Kaveh's suffering, the narrative might simply state he had had enough. This abrupt shift in rhythm acts as a narrative hammer blow, focusing the audience's attention and highlighting the gravity of a decision or an event. The language is scholarly and accessible, using elevated and sometimes archaic vocabulary to lend the story a sense of historical weight and timelessness, but never to the point of being obscure. Terms like patricide, sycophancy, and demonic pact are used alongside more visceral, poetic descriptions. Personification is a common device, with abstract concepts like tyranny, justice, and fear treated as active characters in the drama. Tyranny is a colossus with feet of clay, while hope is a spark that ignites a conflagration. This hybrid style ensures that the legend operates on multiple levels simultaneously, as a thrilling, narrative-driven story, a scholarly piece of political allegory, and a poetic, epic meditation on the human condition. The enduring power of the Kaveh and Zahak myth lies in its thematic bookending, a narrative technique that provides a deeply satisfying sense of closure while simultaneously reinforcing the story's central message. The epic begins and ends with an examination of the nature of kingship and the divine right to rule, the concept of the Fa. The tale opens with the tragedy of Jamshid, a good king who becomes a tyrant through arrogance, thereby losing his divine grace and plunging the world into chaos. He is the cautionary tale, the visionary founder who succumbs to the hubris of his own success. This initial failure of leadership creates the central problem that the rest of the narrative must solve. The entire arc of the story, Zahak's evil reign, Kaveh's rebellion, and Feridun's rise, is a journey to restore this lost grace, to find a ruler worthy of the Far. The story closes with the establishment of Feridun's reign. He is the resolution to the problem posed by Jamshid. Unlike his ancestor, Feridun's right to rule is validated not just by his bloodline, but by his actions and his character. He is tested in the wilderness. He proves his humility by embracing the common man's banner. And he demonstrates his wisdom by choosing imprisonment over vengeance in his moment of triumph. His coronation is not the beginning of the story, but the culmination of a long and arduous process of national purification. He is the king who has learned from the mistakes of the past. The thematic bookend is the restoration of just and legitimate rule. The chaos that began with the loss of the Far is resolved with its rightful return to a worthy vessel. However, the ending is tinged with the wisdom of experience. The final image is not just of Feridun on his throne, but also of Zahak chained in his mountain. This duality is crucial. The new golden age is founded upon the memory of the darkness that preceded it. The story starts with a warning about the fallibility of good rulers and ends with a reminder of the eternal threat of contained evil. This structure transforms the epic from a simple adventure into a cyclical philosophy of history, suggesting that the balance between just rule and tyranny is not a permanent victory, but a constant, dynamic struggle that every generation must navigate anew. The narrative of Kaveh and Zahak is a timeless exploration of the cyclical nature of history, a theme that is subtly woven into the fabric of the epic. It posits that history is not a linear progression towards enlightenment, but a recurring pattern of order, decay, chaos, and rebirth. The story begins with a golden age under King Jamshid, a period of unparalleled peace and prosperity that represents the pinnacle of civilized order. However, the narrative immediately demonstrates the fragility of such an order. Jamshid's hubris introduces the element of decay, a spiritual corruption that weakens the foundations of his great society. This decay inevitably leads to a period of chaos, personified by the 1,000-year reign of Zahak. His rule is the antithesis of Jamshid's golden age. It is a dark age, an era of systematic oppression where the forces of evil hold sway and the natural order is inverted. Yet, even in the depths of this chaos, the seeds of rebirth are being sown. The secret survival of Feridun, the rightful heir, and the simmering resentment of the people, embodied by Kaveh, represent the forces of restoration gathering strength in the shadows. The rebellion itself is the moment of violent rebirth, the chaotic process through which the old, corrupt order is overthrown. The final victory of Feridun and the establishment of his just kingdom mark the return to a state of order, a new golden age. The cycle is complete. However, the story's wisdom lies in its implicit understanding that this new order is also, eventually, subject to the same forces of decay. Feridun himself, though a great king, would later face tragedy and strife among his own sons, hinting at the beginnings of a new cycle of conflict. The imprisonment of Zahak further reinforces this theme. He is the chaos that has been contained but not eliminated, a reminder that the potential for a new dark age always exists. This cyclical view of history gives the legend a profound philosophical depth. It suggests that the struggle between justice and tyranny, order and chaos, is the permanent engine of the human story. Each generation is fated to play its part in this ongoing drama, and the ultimate lesson is not how to achieve a final permanent victory, but how to act with courage and integrity within the cycle in which one finds oneself. The tale of the blacksmith, the prince, and the Serpent King is, at its heart, a profound and enduring commentary on the anatomy of revolution. It dissects the complex alchemy required to transform widespread suffering into a successful movement for change, presenting a model that is both mythical and strikingly pragmatic. The story argues that a revolution requires three essential components. First, it needs a catalyst rooted in authentic personal grievance. This is the role of Kaveh. The revolution does not begin with a political manifesto or a strategic plan. It begins with the roar of a father who has been pushed too far. This provides the movement with its moral core and its emotional power, ensuring it is a genuine popular uprising, not an elite power grab. Kaveh's raw, undeniable suffering makes the cause relatable and just. Second, a revolution requires a symbol that can unite the disparate anger of the oppressed into a single, focused identity. This is the function of the Derafsh Kaviani. The leather apron is a work of political genius, a symbol that is inclusive, humble, and deeply meaningful. It allows thousands of individuals to see their own struggles reflected in a single banner, transforming a crowd into a cohesive body with a shared purpose. It is the flag under which private pain becomes collective power. Third, and perhaps most critically, the story asserts that a successful revolution requires a principle of legitimate authority to guide it. This is the role of Feridun. While Kaveh provides the fire, Feridun provides the vessel. He is the symbol of the just order that the revolution seeks to install, preventing the movement from collapsing into mere anarchy or nihilistic destruction. He represents the what for, not just the what against. His royal lineage and innate far provide a clear and acceptable alternative to the tyrant's rule, giving the people a positive vision to fight for. The alliance between Kaveh and Feridun is the story's ultimate statement on revolution. It must be a marriage of the people's will and righteous leadership. It is the fusion of the blacksmith's hammer and the king's crown, a powerful and timeless formula for the overthrow of tyranny and the foundation of a just and lasting peace.